Yes?
What's the name of this, the Salish sea pod, and how many members?
She said, what's the name of the Salish sea pod and how many members are there?
You're talking about this? You're talking about the southern residents?
Is that, oh, it's
Yeah,
southern, so it's
their
Canadian?
current numbers. Okay, so there's J, K, and L pod, and what you've got right now is with the 4 new babies. I'm going to mess this up. 81, I believe, currently. 77. We lost Rhapsody. We gained a 4. It should be about 81 now.
Yes?
Genetically, do they interbreed with other pods, or is that their whole genetic pool, 81?
Do they interbreed with other pods, or is that their whole genetic pool is 81?
See, that's kind of the amazing thing about the southern residents, but it's also their Achilles heel. They are matrilineal, and they stay within those matrilines. And there is enough genetic diversity within each pod for them to continue to breed within the pods. So they do not interbreed between the pods, and they never interbreed between ecotypes. So transients will never interbreed with residents. We're used to talking to folks in the Pacific Northwest, and they touch on it in the film. There are 4 common ecotypes to the Pacific Northwest where the southern residents range. You have the southern residents, you have the northern residents, and they delineate between halfway up Vancouver Island, between Vancouver Island and mainland British Columbia, up to the bottom of Alaska, like the Ketchikan area. And the northern residents, the southern residents don't hang out together. In fact, they never hang out together. They also eat different things, and that's one of the other ecotypes out there is the transients. As they touch on in the film, they're mammal eaters. They eat no fish, they eat seals, they eat porpoises, they eat other mammals. So they are so separate in not only their genetics are actually slightly different between each one. If you look at a transient, you can tell it right away. Like you get on the water, the transient dorsal fin is angular. It looks like a triangle almost. Resident is very curved. It's very subtle, and especially in the females, there's a dimorphism, and you can see it very easily in the females. It's very smooth, very boomerang looking. There's another ecotype called the offshores, and offshores are amazing in the sense that nobody really has a good handle on what their life cycle is and what they're eating. They've been known to eat great white sharks. So that rumor that goes around that great white sharks are the biggest, baddest animal predators out there is false. Killer whales are at the top. They're the apex predator. They're actually the apex predator of the entire ocean. And so those ecotypes never intermix that way.
Yes?
Was I wrong, or did I hear, though, that there was some mingling, that some transients have shown up in the southern residents area? Is that true?
Yeah. He said there was some mingling. The transients show up in the southern resident area.
Oh, yeah. But here's the weird thing. You would think that the mammal eaters would be the biggest, baddest, scariest ones. That's the opposite. The southern residents dominate. So when the transients are in the southern resident area and they hear the vocalizing of the southern residents, they will beat feet, so to speak, and get out of the area because they are known to actually rumble, and the southern residents will beat up on them. That's happened very infrequently, but it's been documented. What really separates them, though, is transients don't vocalize to the extent that southern residents do. Because of what they eat, transients being mammal eaters, their prey could hear them if they vocalize. So they stay pretty quiet. When we were filming, you probably saw that one transient that came up that had the jagged dorsal fin. His name was Chainsaw. I don't know why. But actually, there were about 22 of them out there, and they were 200 meters out, and frolicking, having a good time. And Shari and I were on a very small boat, and Shari is filming underwater, and I was filming, on the surface, and neither one of us had any clue the chainsaw was there until he popped up. He literally popped up 10 feet out from the boat, eyeballing us. It's a little unnerving, but I mean, let me put this fact out there. No human being has ever been attacked by a killer whale in the wild, ever. So they're interested in us. They go out of their way sometimes, transients, residents, it doesn't matter. They go out of their way to socialize with human beings. We present a danger to them. It's an inherent danger for us to be in proximity to them, because when we see them out on the water, we're in a vessel, and that vessel has a propeller and it makes noise and blah, blah, blah. And that puts stress on them. It also can, I don't know if you guys remember that one sequence in there. There was an orca that came up, and there was a boat that almost hit it. And I just happened to be filming the boat because we were on a research vessel. We were on a NOAA permit to be on a research vessel. And I was filming that boat because it was coming into a restricted area. And I just had a feeling that maybe something was going to happen. And sure enough, that orca came up, and it must have seen it at the last moment and went right back down, and the boat went right over it. We actually saw that again, that I didn't film, happen in front of us. So our presence out there presents an inherent danger. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yes?
The film talked a lot about the lack of Chinook salmon as the reason the orcas are declining. What's the root cause behind the lack of the Chinook salmon?
What's the root cause behind the lack of the Chinook salmon?
Two sides to the question. One is historical. They were overfished dramatically up until the 1950s, and it bottomed out completely. And that happened for two reasons. Number one, the Atlantic salmon stock, which was the major commodity. I don't want to get into the whole commodity stock, but the major commodity issue for the salmon trade took place in Europe up until around the 1800s, when it shifted to the United States because the Pacific Northwest really started to grow, and they started fishing like crazy. And by the 1920s, though, the salmon stocks were plummeting. They are now at 10% of their historic numbers, and they hit that baseline because of overfishing, and they never really raised back up from that. Now the current problem is a little different. Chinook salmon are imperiled by two main factors. Number one is the rivers that they spawn in when they go to lay eggs and fertilize eggs and end their life cycle, is chiefly within the Columbia Basin. The Columbia Basin encompasses everything from Oregon, parts of Idaho, Washington State, parts of British Columbia. I mean, it's this massive connected river system. And there are 20, I'm sorry, that would be great if there were 20. There are 235 dams on the Columbia Basin alone. Those dams are impediments to salmon. They cannot get to their traditional spawning area. And how that affects them is they spawn in waters that aren't very protective for the fry that are born. They are exposed to predators. They're in swift moving water. They're in waters that are subject to the snowmelt. And when that snowmelt happens and the water level rises, it changes the chemical composition of water, which changes their health status. When they get out to the open ocean, they're already struggling. And that's kind of one side of the issue. The other side is what you heard about the legacy toxins, as far as the things that are existing already in the water and the things that are being added to the water. So you have heavy metals that exist out there. You have the flame retardants, which certain flame retardants have been restricted from use since the 1970s, but those toxins will not break down in the water, and they are still there bioaccumulating. And that starts at the lowest troposphere and goes all the way to the top, up to the orcas. The Chinook get imperiled by that. They also get imperiled by zoonotic factors. So you heard about fish farming. Fish farming is a ridiculous practice that endangers wild salmon. There is no upshot to fish farming except on a consumer level. So human beings get to eat cheap, diseased, parasitic fish, and wild fish catch the diseases that they have. This isn't conjecture. The fish farming industry started, again, in Europe because our stocks were failing. They went ahead and started in the Icelandic countries. And the Atlantic salmon were the first to be highly commercially fish farmed. And they bottomed out because of disease and parasites. When that happened, they had to sell off their stocks and try to recuperate some of their losses. They started to sell to South America. The Chilean government bought a lot of Norwegian salmon stock, and they created fish farms down there in Chile. Those fish farms collapsed in the 80s. By the 90s, they were completely gone, and that was because of parasites and disease. This is now happening in British Columbia. The difference is in British Columbia, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It doesn't even begin to cover the same multi-billion-dollar industry. To get rid of fish farming in Canada would cause an economic collapse for a lot of the communities on the coast there. It's a complicated issue. But those are the main issues that are attacking Chinook salmon, wild Chinook salmon.
When we were down in the march for Lolita, we got to hear Dr. Naomi Rose speak. Do you guys know her? Do you work with her? And also, what's the status of Lolita being able to go back to a CPEN and go back to the southern residents?
Do we know Dr. Naomi Rose, and have we worked with her? And then what's the status of Lolita and returning home to the CPEN?
We met Dr. Naomi Rose. She was at the Fin Fest where we won the film of the year. She was at that film fest. She won for Scientist of the Year. So that was the first time we'd ever met her and talked to her. I don't really have a strong background. I've had scattered communications with her. When we first started doing the film, we looked at the people that were involved in the southern residents. And Dr. Rose, even though she's very influential, she has a great history with orcas, actually. It just didn't enter into the story. Captivity in fragile waters is a baseline to understand the southern residents were decimated because of the captive industry of removing wild orcas, a third of their entire population within a 10-year period. If that hadn't happened, the southern residents would probably not be in the condition that they are now. Okay, as far as Lolita, interesting thing. It is an ongoing legal battle, but Lolita finally got accepted under the protections of the Endangered Species Act that protect the southern residents as well. So she's identified as a southern resident. In a common sense way of thinking, this would mean that they're breaking the law by harassing her every day, making her jump in the air and playing rock music and whatnot. But in a legal sense, she's property. And so there's going to be years of legal battles to decide which wins out, her protected status or the ownership status. Howard Garrett, who is one of the producers of our film, he's a co-founder of Orca Network, is he's one of the leading folks making the progress towards trying to secure her release. Now, one thing I'll tell you about our film is you saw a very special hatchery that very few people outside of the Pacific Northwest has ever seen. And it's on Orcas Island. It was a natural one, the really cool, different one, where he said that the salmon they produce are as close to wild salmon biologically as ever have been recognized by fisheries. Their methodology is amazing. And here's the thing, that area where he does that, he is willing to donate and coordinate to create a CPEN for Lolita, so she has a home that's not only protected because it's in a beautiful bay area, but has a salmon run, and a very nice salmon run that's guaranteed to come through her CPEN. Anybody else?
Do you guys want to touch on the 2 oil spills last week?
Do you want to touch on the 2 oil spills last week in the area?
The answer to that question is, man, I wish I didn't have to. One of the things we never intended to do with this film was, number one, chronicle extinction, because that's a real bummer. Number two is be prophetic in any way, but the number two came true last week, twice. So within the Salish Sea, up by Vancouver, there was an oil spill that took place. And J-Pod is still in the area. J-Pod actually swam within 14 miles where the spill took place, and who knows what the currents have done to the bunker fuel that was spilled into the water. And if you don't know what bunker fuel is, it is a heinous version of oil that's used to actually power large vessels. And this fuel is not only carcinogenic, but it is like the legacy toxins. It doesn't break down very, very easily. And chances are, my biggest concern, if you look at it if you flip it around, you look at it in the aspect of the fish that are in that environment. So they had some animals, and I'm sorry to the kids out there, but they had some animals that were killed from this small oil spill already. The fish that are in that environment currently are going to bioaccumulate up the food chain. They will end up in the salmon, and the salmon will end up in the southern residents. The only thing that protects the southern residents is the fact that their blubber acts as a barrier between toxins entering their internal systems. They have to eat more to have more blubber. It's a catch-22. And you eat more toxic stuff, increasing the blubber. Oil spill is a horrible thing. So Dr. Eva Salinas, the researcher Eva Salinas that you saw in the film was on hand for the Exxon Valdez oil spill. We could have spent hours just making a film on her experiences. I'm very sorry to say that she is currently battling cancer. It could be related to the exposures that she had because she stayed within our region for the past 25 years. But she watched an entire pod of Chugach transients reach a point of extinction. There are 7 of them left, they're all males. There is no hope that they're gonna come back. So as long as they live out their life cycle, it's as long as they'll be around. So you'll slowly see them dwindle down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 0. And that's going to happen in our lifetime. That is what the problem with the oil spill is. So like a day later, the Orcas Island that you saw that hatchery on had a fuel spill. A fuel truck leaving a gas station turned over and spilled a few hundred gallons of fuel. But I am very pleased to report that the response between the county, the federal government, local volunteers, the residents stopped that fuel from hitting the water. So it would probably have no effect at all, but it could have. It very easily could have. And the reason why the one up in British Columbia is still a danger is there was a 12-hour lag time between when it happened and when it got reported. And then there was an additional few hours lag time between the reporting and when any vessels went out to try to contain it. That is exactly what happened with the Exxon Valdez. Nothing has changed in 25 years, and Eva said it. It can happen anywhere where the threat of an oil spill can happen. So anywhere where tankers go, Gulf of Mexico, here in Florida, we know how that can play out. So.
I just want to say, as far as like the oil spills and things like that, there's mega corporations that want to triple the pipelines across Canada and even through the United States. We have the technology, we have green technology. It needs to be supported by the citizens and demanded by the citizens, because this can't happen. This is our home. It can't happen. It seriously can. My friend Ruben, he was a counselor. He went to school and he was at the top of his game. He had a great success rate, and then he found out what was happening to our environment. He dropped his career. He worked his entire life. He went to school, he went to college. He dropped his career immediately and started being one of the top climate change defenders in the entire world. And he is currently involved in court cases in British Columbia against Kinder Morgan. and trying to stop the pipelines that are going across Canada. So one person can make a huge difference, and I think that if we just all take action in whatever way we're passionate about, we can make big changes. So I think that's what we need to do.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate you being here tonight.